There's a detail no one wants to look at, a silence growing behind the closed doors of rectories. Priests are leaving the ministry, and not for a lack of faith, but for something much darker that is arising within the church itself. Today, we'll tell the story of a priest who dared to speak the truth, a truth that could change the way you look at every vocation. Stay until the end. As long as we continue to talk about reforms, synodal processes, and openness to the contemporary world, a much more concrete and much more serious reality remains in the shadows. A growing number of priests, especially in the first years of their ministry, are abandoning the priesthood. These are not isolated incidents, nor are they individual frailties easily dismissed with psychological formulas. This is a systemic phenomenon, rooted in a silent transformation of the ministry that is consuming the lives of many young priests from within. The story of one of them, called Toby, isn't exceptional. It's representative. And that's precisely why it's disturbing. His story was reported in full by the National Catholic Register, but what's striking isn't just the facts, it's what they reveal. Because Toby's story isn't an isolated case, it's a litmus test of a system that orders, promotes, and pushes, but doesn't support. Ordination Day should be the culmination of discernment. For Toby, it was the culmination of conflict. When Toby, not his real name, approached the altar during his ordination mass about a decade ago, he was understandably nervous, perhaps much more than normal. Even though he had been raised Catholic, loved his faith, and received constant encouragement in seminary, he was still harboring serious doubts about whether he could truly say yes to the priesthood. That sentence condenses the entire fracture. A man who, at the moment in which he should affirm his vocation before God, is unable to recognize it before himself. The problem isn't just the doubt, which is inherent in every authentic vocation, but what happened around that doubt. The expectations of his family, his supporters, and the seminary had created a situation in which he couldn't step back. This statement deserves to be explored because it describes a dynamic that many priests report privately. The idea that once you enter the seminary, you can no longer stay without betraying someone. Vocation thus becomes a one-way path, where ordination appears more like an inevitable goal than a free response to God's call. In other words, discernment turns into inertia. Toby entered the parish with a sincere desire to do good, but soon found himself immersed in a world that seemed to have no connection with what had been presented to him as the heart of the priesthood. The care of souls took a back seat. Administration came to the fore. Not the ordinary routine tasks that every parish priest has always faced, but a tangle of duties that fills every mental space. Accounting, reporting, meetings, personnel management, fundraising campaigns, construction projects, 1,000 bureaucratic requests from the diocesan center, often motivated more by the need to secure the diocese than by the pastoral care of the communities. It's a documented fact. Over the last 20 years, the administrative structure of dioceses has become so professionalized that the priest has become more of an operations manager than a spiritual father. This process, born in response to scandals and legal requirements, ended up redefining the ministry's center of gravity. The result, for Toby, was devastating. By Christmas, I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, he recalls. The image is accurate. It doesn't speak of exhaustion. but of an impending mental breakdown. I was trying to do something wholeheartedly, correctly and conscientiously, and my heart wasn't there. Celebrating Mass, in particular, had become very painful. I felt a chasm between what I was doing and where I was mentally. In the priestly lexicon, such a statement is a seismic event. The Eucharistic celebration, the core of the priest's identity, becomes painful, lacerating, and creates an unbridgeable gap between the sacramental reality and the interior state. When a priest describes Mass as painful, he isn't talking about stress. He's talking about a profound spiritual conflict, a rift between the sacred act and his own capacity to experience that act. The request for laicization came shortly thereafter. The priest left the ministry, got married, and built a new life. Yet his current serenity doesn't erase the fundamental fact. His vocation was abandoned, not because it was false, but because it was crushed. And what crushed her was not the world, nor secularization, nor individual fragility. It was the very structure within which her vocation was supposed to grow. The experts interviewed put it bluntly: burnout, loneliness, and insufficient spiritual and human support are wearing down young priests. The most recent analyses show that those who drop out within the first 5 years almost always reveal gaps in their training, not their character. Gaps in discernment, gaps in guidance, gaps in the seminary's ability to prepare young men for what they will find. At the same time, those who leave after the first 5 years almost always do so due to a lack of support in their ministry, isolation, an excess of responsibilities, and a lack of priestly fraternity. The most alarming fact is that all this is no coincidence. It is the effect of a model. In recent decades, the idea has spread that the priest must be omnipresent and omnifunctional, always available, always efficient, always ready to plug any administrative gap. If we add that many priests live in empty rectories, without the presence of other brothers, without a real community, without structured moments of fraternity, the result becomes clear. The priest burns not because he is fragile, but because he is consumed by an impossible task. Toby's story also highlights another disturbing aspect: the lack of a true culture of stopping vocations when doubts arise. If a seminarian expresses uncertainty, he or she is too often encouraged to trust and move on, without realizing that this kind of pressure does not breed faithful priests, but broken ones. The system seems to have lost the ability to say, "Not now," or "Not like this," or "You're not ready." It is as if the numerical crisis in vocations has generated a sort of institutional anxiety, a race to ordain without ever slowing down, even at the cost of sacrificing the quality of discernment in order to save the apparent quantity of new ordinations. It is not surprising, then, that priests like Toby experience ordination as the point at which their interiority is silenced. What happens next? The loneliness, the excessive administration, the lack of accompaniment, the perception of being sacramental machines worn out by the rhythm is only the consequence of an approach that was wrong from the start. And in the end, the most uncomfortable question remains: how many true vocations are being lost because no one had the courage to let them be free? How many priests could have remained if their cry had been heard? How many others are celebrating today in the silence of the sacristy, experiencing the same abyss as Toby without finding anyone willing to take them by the hand before they fall. The crisis isn't a newspaper headline, it's a face, a voice, an altar before which a man says, "Mass," while his heart can no longer bear it. And as long as this continues, the problem won't be the scarcity of vocations, but the Church's inability to nurture them. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.